Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and happy Tuesday as we welcome you here to Sports Now on the TKDS Sports Network, live in Beaver Creek, Ohio, in the McAfee Heating and Air studio. Jackson Lightcap Matt Pennington, happy Tuesday and an action-packed show coming your way over the next couple of hours.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. We got another 2-hour show coming up. It's back to the grind, as they say, after a weekend where the Thursday show felt a little weird because it was only 1 hour. We were standing up and it was nonstop.
It was straight
talking.
Through.
Exactly. It was nonstop talking for the full hour. And then we didn't have the Saturday show, but obviously yesterday we had the Monday show. We're back in rhythm. We're back into the flow of things. You guys are going to have to deal with us for another 2 hours if you decide to stay for that long. If you don't, it's understandable because we go crazy sometimes on the show and we start ranting about random things. But if you enjoy that, stick around because it's bound to happen. I don't know when it's going to happen, but it's going to.
I mean, yesterday we ranted and bantered back and forth for about 10, 15 minutes about how we, maybe not that long, but about how we have faces for radio.
3 to 5 minutes, I think, is roughly how long we took talking about that.
Being dramatic on this Tuesday. But we hope everybody out there had a happy Tuesday action-packed show coming your way. Of course, the Cincinnati Bengals. Big win in Jacksonville last night. Jake Browning, what a night for Jake Browning. We're getting into that here in just a few moments. We're going to talk about some MLS. The MLS Conference Finals were played on Saturday. FC Cincinnati squared off against the Columbus Crew. We'll get to that here in this first hour as well. Not to mention, winter meetings officially underway. There has been no movement in winter meetings thus far with any of the big free agent names. So we're getting into all the winter meetings and some Major League Baseball offseason coming up to end out this first hour. And then in hour number 2, we're having an exclusive hour for college and NBA basketball.
Yeah, I'm excited. You talk about FC Cincinnati. I mean, I'm not too much of a soccer guy, but when the Eastern Conference Final comes down to FC Cincinnati versus the Columbus Crew, doesn't matter where you're at in the state. You got to be pretty excited that one of your teams is going to make it to the MLS championship game. And one of those teams, those games were played on Saturday. I'll spoil who made it in the West. The West was won by LA. They took down Houston 2-0. But Columbus versus Cincinnati, you got to feel happy being in Ohio knowing that one of your teams, whether it be Columbus or whether it be Cincinnati, an Ohio team was going to go to the MLS championship.
Yeah, nonetheless, so we're getting into that here in just a little bit. But, Matt, let's circle back. Let's talk about the football game that was being played last night on Monday Night Football. The Cincinnati Bengals, in what seemed it was a must-win scenario for the Cincinnati Bengals. Jake Browning, 32 for 37, 354 yards, 1 passing touchdown, 1 rushing touchdown, no interceptions. Jake Browning balled out on Monday Night Football. And in fact, he is the first ever NFL player to have an 86% completion percentage, throw for 354 or more yards within his first 2 NFL starts. Jake Browning giving some hope to some Bengal fans that, especially with how banged up the AFC is, we talked about that on the show. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence went down in that game yesterday as well. We'll get into that here in just a little bit. But when you look at what Cincinnati was able to do, and you look at the amount of backup quarterbacks right now that are playing in the AFC, Cincinnati with a win last night, they're 1 game back from a wild card spot, not just any wild card spot, the number 5 wild card spot as well, the first wild card spot available. Cincinnati, if Jake Browning can continue to play like he did yesterday, this is a team that can find themselves in the postseason. And this is a team, if healthy, with Jake Browning, that I think can make a run if Browning continues to play and build off what he was able to do last night.
And yeah, talking about Jake Browning, you have to give props to how good of a night he had, but also look at the numbers Jamar Chase put up. 11 catches, 149 yards, and a touchdown. I saw in the earlier stages of that game, it seemed like he was almost fed up with Jake Browning being the quarterback for the team. He was a little upset that not much was being done with the offense, and then, boom, 149 yards off 11 catches and a touchdown. That is a monster night for Jamar Chase, but like you said, you got to give props to Browning. Almost 86.5% completion percentage on the night, over 350 yards and a touchdown. The only stat that doesn't blow up in your face is the touchdown numbers he has. But he ran one in, and the reason he didn't pass for so many is because Joe Mixon ran 2 touchdowns in. So you got to feel pretty good if you're a Bengals fan with what Jake Browning was able to do. Me as a Browns fan, I'm not too excited about that because that means that you got Joe Burrow 2.0 at the offense at this point if he keeps these numbers up. But And the reason I say it's not too fun is because the Browns still have to play the Bengals, and with how things are going, there's a really good shot that is going to be for a playoff spot between the two teams, a wild card spot between the two teams. So if you're a Bengals fan, you got to be pretty happy about it. If you're anybody that has the Bengals left on your schedule, you're not feeling too happy about what Jake Browning just did last night, because that was a great, great game.
And if you watch the game, obviously Jake Browning, what an incredible game. He played a lot of poise. He knew where he was going with the football. He was very decisive. Jake Browning put together a masterclass on Monday Night Football. But Matt, I want to give some props to the behind the scenes and the coaching staff. Zach Taylor, Brian Callahan, they called a perfect game yesterday. And even on all those trick plays that didn't necessarily go their way with a backup quarterback out there, you're going to have to get crafty with the football. Cincinnati did it a couple times. Obviously, didn't work out. The interception throw by Tyler Boyd. But when you look at what Cincinnati and the offensive play calling was between Callahan, Zach Taylor, they made Jake Browning look more comfortable. They implemented the run game, the rushing attack with Chase Brown and Joe Mixon was very effective all night long. They combined for over 120 yards rushing if you want to include Jake Browning's numbers. They were way over 140 yards rushing as well. So when you look at what Cincinnati was able to do on the coaching standpoint, that's what you have to do if you want to win with a backup quarterback. You have got to relieve pressure. I'm not taking anything away from Jake Browning. Jake Browning played lights out. There's no question about that. Jake Browning had the best game of his career, and it's something to build off of. I'm just saying you also have to give some props to the play calling and some props to the coaching. But Jake Browning, again, giving hope. And if Cincinnati can continue to steam up that offense like they did last night against, mind you, a very good Jacksonville defense. It's not like they're playing the worst defense in the NFL. A good Jacksonville defense where there was no pressure on Jake Browning. He was very decisive with the ball. Run game was working. Pass game was working. If the Bengals can continue to roll that offense like they did last night, like I said, this is a team that can find themselves in the playoffs.
And it's one stat that we were talking about a ton when it came down to the Bengals versus Steelers that we saw a week, I would say it was obviously a little bit more than a week ago, but you took a look at the time of possession the Steelers had the ball and the amount of plays the Steelers had. It was 68 plays to, I believe, 41 plays, the Steelers over the Bengals when it came to the total plays. The time of possession was like 37 minutes towards the Steelers. You take a look at the time of possession and the total plays in this game for the Cincinnati Bengals, 34 minutes with the ball. I think it was around 34 minutes and 3 seconds. Jacksonville had the ball for 34 minutes and 12 seconds in the game, so very even when it came to the time of possession. 72 plays for the Bengals. That helps astronomically when it comes to how the defense is going to play, how confident Jake Browning can be, the fact that you're giving him more opportunities, the fact that you're giving him more you're giving him more chances to make plays and to make things happen with that offense. So going from 41 total plays on offense to 72 total plays, obviously you're going to see a jump in stats when you get 31 extra plays to play in the game, but you're also going to see more confidence, and you're going to see the Bengals defense step up like they did, because they're not going to be out on the football field gassed for an entire half of football almost and not be able to get the stops that they need to get the offense back out on the field. So the Bengals as a whole yesterday managed the game a lot better than they were able to against the Steelers, and I think that's another reason the Bengals were able to come away on top last night in OT.
I will say this, although the offense was perfect, obviously that interception thrown by Tyler Boyd on a trick play didn't necessarily work out in the Bengals' favor, but the offense for Cincinnati, you get the sense that even though with how, I'm going to say perfect, because obviously you can't play a perfect game of football. If you were playing a perfect game of football, you would have run 10 plays, 10 99-yard touchdowns or something crazy around those lines.
I would say the closest to a perfect game of football is what we saw the Dolphins do against Denver. That'd probably be the closest to a perfect game, at least on the offensive side. That'd probably be the closest to a perfect game of football you can get on the offensive side.
And you look at what Cincinnati was able to do yesterday. They did play a perfect game on the offensive side of the football. They still left drives out on the line, and they also still left points on the board. Obviously, Evan McPherson, he missed that 57-yarder. It hit off the crossbar. But when you look at, again, how far that kick was, he was kicking into the wind. That's not an easy kick. I don't expect Evan McPherson to go out there and nail that every single time. But remember what backed them up. It was a trick play and then a sack and the Cincinnati just kept getting backed up. With where they were, it was a 52-yard field goal. And then they continued to get backed up, and they had to make a big play to send McPherson out there, and it did not work. So obviously, you don't have those loss of plays. Well, guess what? You have a easier field goal that Evan McPherson knocks through. It was off the crossbar on the 57-yard line, 57-yarders, and it was off the crossbar. You move that to where you had the football before that trick play where it lost 7 yards. The throw that Jamar Chase had, the only throw Jamar Chase had on the game where it was -7 yards, then it goes through. It goes through the uprights. You miss 3 points there on the board. That eliminates overtime. And then you also take a look at Cincinnati, that interception. That set up Jacksonville with very, very good field position. It was already 1st and goal, and the Jacksonville Jaguars were able to punch it in. You punted a couple times at the 50-yard line. Cincinnati, obviously, they left, in my opinion, more points on the board, and I think that they also gave almost a freebie 7 points for Jacksonville's offense after that interception thrown by Tyler Boyd. So when you look at what Cincinnati was able to do, they left points on the board, and yet they still put up points, a major amount of points, 34-31 to take down Jacksonville with the backup quarterback. Matt, let's flip it over to the defensive side of the football. Although Cincinnati played almost a perfect game on offense, yes, you have some things you can clean up. The defensive side of the football worried me yesterday for Cincinnati. Jacksonville was marching the football down the field with ease. They were running the football. They were throwing the football, whether it was C.J. Beathard or Trevor Lawrence before he left with that ankle injury. They were moving the football down the field multiple times with ease at some points. They just completely walked over the Cincinnati defense, especially that secondary. I liked seeing the pass rush show up for Cincinnati, but you could definitely tell that Cincinnati in that secondary was missing Cam Taylor-Britt, who just went on IR yesterday before the game with an ankle injury.
And yeah, that's been really the big question mark because we've been talking about pretty much all season long the defenses inside of the AFC North, how a majority of the defenses can probably be thrown inside of the top 10. Right now, I think the Ravens and the Steelers are 100% still inside that conversation for a top 10 defense. I think the Browns and the Bengals are slowly starting to slip their way out of that top 10 conversation. The Browns, the only reason they're getting slipped out of the conversation is because they are so inconsistent on defense. They can have a game where they hold an offense to 70 total yards, and then they've got a game like they had against the Rams last weekend where they put up 36 points, and the Browns aren't able to do anything and aren't able to respond on offense in time to do anything to help the defense out. So, and then you take a look at the Bengals. You talk about, obviously, they got a pretty big win against Jacksonville, but still allowed almost 400 total yards of offense. And it seemed like for a majority of the game, Jacksonville was able to just march the football down the field. You talked about the passing yardage. The running yards, it was good the total number of yards that the Cincinnati Bengals held the Jaguars to on the ground. It was only 71 rushing yards, but over 300 yards passing with 2 different quarterbacks in that game. That's something that the Bengals are going to want to try to find a way to fix. But obviously, with Cam Taylor-Britt on IR, it's going to be a lot easier said than done to try to fix those issues.
And Matt, not to mention the fact that Cincinnati, that defense, it has concerned me. And we've talked about it a lot on this show. Cincinnati, that defense, they have relied on getting turnovers. You look at every single one of their games that they've played in that have been close, minus this one, they have allowed other teams to march the football downfield, but they come away with turnovers. They did that a couple times against C.J. Stroud and the Texans. They needed a pick. Cam Taylor-Britt certainly got that pick. They did that against the Steelers. The Steelers, they were in field goal range. A touchdown was called back, and then the very next play, they forced a fumble. They've done that multiple times this season. They did it, obviously, I know Tennessee was a blowout, but early in that game, they did it a couple times to the Tennessee Titans. They've done that to the Arizona Cardinals. You look at the Bengals defense as a whole, and outside of a few teams this season, those teams being the LA Rams and the Pittsburgh Steelers, they were able to, and I'll even throw the Buffalo Bills in this, but you look at the teams that Cincinnati played, this season, that defense has allowed the opposing offense to march the football down the field multiple times and almost at ease, at will for the opposing offense. Cincinnati this time has been massively bailed out by forcing turnovers. That's their strong suit, which, Matt, that's a great thing. If you could force turnovers at times you need turnovers, that is a tremendous thing that can help bolster your defense. But when you cannot obtain those turnovers, that's when you start to see games play out like how it did last night in Jacksonville. You almost allowed 400 total yards. You allowed 31 points. Cincinnati, they rely too much on obtaining turnovers. They have got to start making stops earlier in drives. I can't tell you how many times the Bengals have gotten their opposing offense to a third down, and the opposing offense converts against the Cincinnati defense. That's got to be a focal point moving forward for Lou Anarumo if Cincinnati wants to continue a run to get into the postseason and also win throughout the postseason.
And it's one thing I've noticed from at least the Cleveland Browns, since that's a team I love. That's a team that I follow more than any other team in the NFL. And I've seen some Bengal games here and there, but I want to see if it's kind of a similar thing in Cincinnati as well. But another thing you talk about, the Cincinnati Bengals pride themselves and pride that defense off turnovers. I don't know if it's the exact same for Cincinnati or not, but I know that the Cleveland Browns, that defense, they pride themselves on getting to the quarterback. If they can't get to the quarterback, that's when you start seeing the Browns have issues. I feel like that also might be an underlying issue for the Bengals too, with how good that pass rush can be. And that's why I'm bouncing the question to you, because I don't know if that is the main focal point of the Cincinnati defense, or if in games where they do get to the quarterback, like the reason I bring up the Browns and the Bengals in this is I feel like it's the same, but I know for a fact it's the case for the Browns. They get to the quarterback because the Browns, I think they're one of the worst teams in the league on defense when it comes to turning the ball over and getting takeaways, but the defense can get to the quarterback, and if it doesn't, that's when the Browns look like a top 20 defense in the entire NFL as opposed to a top 10 to a top 5. And that's why I'm asking you as a Browns fan asking a Bengals fan, is it a similar thing, or is it more of the takeaways are the best part of the defense, or does the pass rush also need to be something that goes well for Cincinnati for that defense to look like a top 10 defense?
I think it's a little bit of all, Matt. When you look at Cincinnati's pass rush, obviously outside of Trey Hendrickson, who has 11.5 sacks on the season, they really have nobody. And obviously, B.J. Hill stepped up over the last couple of weeks. Having Sam Hubbard back on that defensive side of the football is huge for the Cincinnati defense. But that defensive line, it seems like, has not been able to get a consistent pass rush, this season. If they can get a consistent pass rush this season, it will help out that young secondary. I also think it's a lot of different things as well. You take a look at how young that Bengals defense is, especially in the secondary. You have second year player Dax Hill, rookie Jordan Battle, rookie DJ Turner, second year player Cam Taylor-Britt. You have a very, very young secondary. So in those secondaries, they've all looked good at some points this season, but I don't think that they've all looked good together. There's been times where Dax Hill, Jordan Battle, Cam Taylor-Britt will all have lockdown coverage. DJ Turner gets burned. There will be time that DJ Turner, Cam Taylor-Britt, Dax Hill all has great coverage. Jordan Battle will get burned. And that's just the inconsistencies and the inexperience on the defensive side of the football. It has not been a time this season where all of their young players on the defensive side have been playing well together. When they've been playing decently well together, that's when you see teams, and that's when you see games such as the Rams game back in week 3, such as Pittsburgh's game last week. That's when you see a lot of those styles and a lot of the Bengals' full potential on the defensive side of the football. But when all of your secondary is playing great, the pass rush is not getting home to the quarterback. I think it's a little bit of it all. I think that really Cincinnati's biggest issue right now on the defensive side of the football is I think that mainly it's the inexperience. A lot of young players on that defense. As time progresses, we're finding some more consistency. It's 4:19 p.m. Eastern Time. We're taking a break. We're talking about the MLS Conference Finals and the Finals coming up this Saturday here on Sports Now.
Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. At McAfee, we understand that life doesn't stop when something in your home breaks down. Our customers count on us to be there, ready when they need us.
Is there anything else you need from me?
No, sir. I have all the information I need.
Great, thanks. Just lock the door on the way out.
Thank you.
Let us get your home up and running again. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
We welcome you back here on Sports Now. Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington. Let's talk about some MLS, Major League Soccer. This is actually, Matt, I believe, the first time we've talked about soccer on this show. So happy to expand our knowledge and happy to expand our horizon on this show, Sports Now. We're talking about soccer a lot more, especially next season. The reason why we're going to soccer and talk about it today on this Tuesday is because the MLS finals have officially been set. There is one team from Ohio, that being the Columbus Crew. Columbus Crew, they went into Cincinnati and took down FC Cincinnati in the Eastern Conference Finals 3-2. Cincinnati, they were up 2-0, and Columbus coming back, 3 unanswered goals. They're going to the MLS Finals.
And yeah, it was one thing that we were talking about, at least on our trip up to Canton. We were taking a look at how FC Cincinnati was doing because, like I said earlier on in the show, I don't really pay too much attention to into soccer. I'm more of a baseball, basketball, football kind of guy myself. But I was taking a look at the games that were coming up because I knew it was postseason time. I knew it was more towards the end of the postseason for the MLS. And then I realized, hey, Columbus is playing Cincinnati. The two teams from Ohio have had phenomenal seasons so far this year. And like you said, FC Cincinnati started off up 2-0, and then Columbus scoring the last 3 goals of the game. They will face off against Los Angeles in the MLS championship game. That game is going to be played on the 9th of December. So if you're a soccer fan in Ohio, you're hoping Columbus can come away with it. That was the team that, like I said, I don't pay too much attention to soccer, but I picked a team before FC Cincinnati became a thing, and that was the Columbus Crew. So I'm still a Columbus Crew guy. I know you're an FC Cincinnati guy, but there's another little bit of underlying part of it. We had another round of our two teams going against each other like we usually have with the Bengals and the Browns.
And Matt, you take a look at FC Cincinnati, and let's just take a look at Cincinnati as a whole, Matt. Cincinnati over the last couple of years, when it comes to our professional sports teams, have had tremendous years, but all of those years ending in heartbreak. You go back to the Super Bowl against the Los Angeles Rams. It was a 4th down and 1. Joe Burrow had Jamar Chase wide open downfield for a possible go-ahead touchdown inside 40 seconds left in the Super Bowl. Then you look at last year, they lost in the AFC Championship game, 1 game away from heading back to the Super Bowl in back-to-back years. Let's take a look at the Cincinnati Reds. The Cincinnati Reds this year, an exciting year. They blow a 9-0 lead late in the season. That's one of the games that stands out when Cincinnati was 1 game out of making a wild card spot. And then FC Cincinnati 25-9. 20 wins, 5 losses, 9 draws for FC Cincinnati this season. They were the number 1 team in MLS soccer almost all year long. They make it to the conference finals. They play the Columbus Crew. They were favored heavily in that. They went up 2-0, and Columbus, 3 unanswered goals in that second half. Columbus ends up coming back and winning 3-2. Columbus, they're heading back to the MLS finals. Once again, Columbus, they won it a couple of years ago, the entire Major League Soccer. They have a chance to do it again this year. Man, I want to go into stats real quick. When you look at FC Cincinnati and the Columbus Crew, one thing that stands out to me, Columbus, they took 26 shots. Cincinnati, 11 shots. Obviously, Columbus only nailing 3 of their 26, Cincinnati only nailing 2 of their 11. But the more shots you take, the more chances of goals you have going in the net. That's exactly what Columbus was able to do. 8 shots on goal, 6 shots on goal for FC Cincinnati. And Matt, when it comes down to it, Columbus, they controlled possession time. They had more shots. They had more shots on goal. They blocked more shots as well. They passed the ball a lot more. They had more passing accuracy. When you look at any of the major stats, well, Columbus and the Columbus Crew won pretty much all of them in the major stat category. FC Cincinnati, a heartbreaking loss to end their season.
And yeah, one thing that I want to talk about with FC Cincinnati, you take a look at, obviously, not the way you wanted the season to end. You wanted to go to the MLS championship game, but you just take a look at what this organization has done in its short time in MLS. They've only had 5 seasons inside of the MLS so far. First year, 6-22-6. Won 6, lost 22, drew in 6 games. 2020 was a little bit of a weird year. Everybody knows about the weird thing that happened. 4 wins, 15 losses, 4 draws. 2021, 4 wins, 22 losses, 8 draws. This is where it starts turning around. 2022, 12 wins, 9 losses, 13 draws. And then a monster year this past year. 20 wins, 5 losses, 9 draws. For a very, very young team and a very, very young organization, it's safe to say FC Cincinnati is making their staple in the MLS right now because only 5 seasons in, they're already contending in the Eastern Conference Championship game. They're already contending to try to make it into the MLS Championship. It goes to show that FC Cincinnati, obviously, this year didn't end the way they wanted it to, starting up 2-0 against the Columbus Crew, losing 3-2. But it's safe to say, this FC Cincinnati team, they're here to stay. They're here to make their staple in MLS as a very, very young organization. And don't be surprised if they continue to go up from here because it's only been an upward trend for FC Cincinnati.
And you look at Columbus Crew. Columbus, they will be squaring off against Los Angeles in the MLS Cup playoff and the championship round. So when you look at this game upcoming, the Columbus Crew, they have a chance to play for the MLS Cup this upcoming Saturday at 4 p.m. Columbus, again, they won it a couple years ago. They have a chance to bring one back to the city of Columbus, which is also another local Ohio team that we want to talk about.
And yeah, like I said, I picked to be a Columbus Crew fan, but that was before FC Cincinnati even decided to exist themselves. So I kind of picked my team before I had a chance of picking the closer team in FC Cincinnati, but I'm happy that Columbus is back in the MLS championship game. They have a chance to win the MLS Cup. They've got a tough game against LA, though, because you talk about this Columbus Crew team in years past being a team that has been competing for cups. They've been making it far in the playoffs. Well, it's safe to say LA's been doing pretty much the same thing. So you talk about a very tough matchup. Columbus has got a tough game on their hands coming up.
All that being said, it's time for a break. We're shift focused to Major League Baseball coming up next when we return.
At McAfee, we understand that life doesn't stop when something in your home breaks down. Our customers count on us to be there, ready when they need us.
Is there anything else you need from me?
No, sir, I have all the information I need.
Great, thanks. Just lock the door on the way out.
Thank you.
Let us get your home up and running again. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. At McAfee, we understand that life doesn't stop when something in your home breaks down. Our customers count on us to be there, ready when they need us.
Is there anything else you need from me?
No, sir, I have all the information I need.
Great, thanks. Just lock the door on the way out.
Thank you.
Let us get your home up and running again. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. It's easy to take the air in your home for granted. But it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Back here on Sports Now, just another reminder, folks, we are live on chat. So if you have any comments, make sure to drop it down below. And if we like it enough, and if it's nice, no cuss words, we'll show it.
I was gonna say, do we have to go
Comment
through
what you want.
go through the whole spiel of if you say a dirty wordy, you're not allowed on the show.
Say
So,
what you want. We just won't be able to show it for
you can
our job reasons.
you
but-
can you can say it. There's nothing against you saying it. It being shown will not happen though. That's the best way of putting it.
Nonetheless, let's focus now. Let's turn our focus on Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball winter meetings started on Sunday. They run through tomorrow. And Matt, we have not seen a whole lot of moves being announced and a whole lot of moves being made. We've seen some depth move. We've seen some minor league baseball contracts being given out at these winter meetings, but we have not seen any of the big names off the board. One of the reasons why I think that is because there's no question about it. Shohei Ohtani is going to set the market. Once he decides where he goes, I think it's going to be a domino effect with free agents.
Yeah, especially with the projected number that he is potentially going to be able to fetch from some teams. It's projected and predicted that he is going to be worth over $500 million for whatever team decides to pick him up. But like you said, he hasn't figured out where he's going yet. So once we see where Shohei Ohtani's going, the one thing I saw, you showed me a picture of it over the weekend, was Shohei Ohtani in a Cubs uniform, and please let's just not have that be the case because that would be terrifying. But
Actually, that was reported today by Bob Nightingale from USA Today that the Cubs losing optimism in signing Shohei Ohtani. So that was publicized today by Bob Nightingale. So
good. Good. That is all that can be said is good. But no, going back on Shohei Ohtani, the fact that the projected and predicted amount of money that he's going to be worth is north of $500 million to whatever team decides to fork up that kind of change to pick him up. I think once we do see where Shohei Ohtani falls, like you said, it's going to set the market for a majority of the free agents that are on the market as we speak. So once that domino falls, I feel like we're just going to see not the entire free agent market, but we're going to see a lot of the free agent market start falling as well. We're going to start seeing where players are going, how much they are going to be paid to go to different teams, because like we said, it's only predicted and it's only projected, so we don't exactly know how much Shohei Ohtani is going to get. But the number being almost 500, if not more, $500 million, I think it's safe to say some other players that might be considered to be worth this amount of money, if Shohei Ohtani gets paid a lot more, those players are going to end up feeling like they're going to have a legitimate sign and proof in Shohei Ohtani getting signed somewhere for however much money he is. If it's for like 900 or not 900, if it was 900, oh my goodness, 590 million. That's where I was going with that. If it's a 590 million and a pitcher is worth maybe 20 or so million a year, they might be able to bump it up to 23, 24, maybe 25 million a year. So you talk about it's going to set the market. That's why I don't think we've seen a lot of the big name players get taken yet so far in this free agency.
Like, we've seen a lot of small deals being handed out, one-year deals. We've seen some minor league deals being signed as well. Cincinnati, before the winter meetings, went out and got some guys as well. Obviously, the draft lottery for Major League Baseball will be held tonight in just under an hour, by the way, 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So there's still a lot to discuss at the winter meetings. But, Matt, just as you mentioned, in years past, we had winter meetings, and it's like boom, 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 a bunch of signings being signed. We know where a lot of these big-name free agents are going to, but it seems like this season, it's just been a bunch of rumors. There's been a lot of trade speculation. There's been a bunch of rumors on who is interested in who, but obviously nothing set in stone, nothing set in ink on the paper. And a lot of that, like I said, is because, and you alluded to it greatly, Shohei Ohtani, he's going to be the one to set the market. I have a strong suspicion once he falls that everybody is going to start to fall. It's going to be a domino effect. Shohei Ohtani, just as you mentioned, Matt, he's worth the most of any MLB free agent out there. And that's not a knock on some of the names out there. That just shows how great Shohei Ohtani is. He's a two-way player. He can pitch. He can hit. I mean, what more can you ask from? So he's looking at a bunch of big market teams. Obviously, big market teams, they get their paws in the batch first. They're going to be looking at Shohei Ohtani. A lot of teams are looking at Shohei Ohtani. Ohtani, obviously, rightfully so, drawing all the attention. Once he falls, he'll set the market. Then we're waiting to start to see where the pitching market and where some of the outfielders market and where all these other players, where their market will increase. Will it stay the same? Will Ohtani maybe take a little bit of less money than what we're expecting? Will that decrease the market? That really just, it will be, we're know all of that once Shohei Ohtani signs to a team. And Matt shifted over to the Cincinnati Reds real quick. That's why I think it was very, very smart for them to go sign Emilio Pagan and Nick Martinez before the winter meetings so that they knew that the price they were getting, because once Shohei Ohtani gets signed, the pitching market, in my mind, is going to increase. Cincinnati were able to bring those guys in on favorable deals. I think that's also great that Philadelphia was able to re-sign Aaron Nola before the winter meetings, because the pitching market is about to rise massively here probably within the next 24 hours.
And yeah, it's one thing that you brought up and you alluded to, and it's a reason why the pitching market and the hitting market is also kind of at a standstill right now, because you talked about Shohei Ohtani. He's one of the few players in MLB history that can throw a baseball over 100 miles an hour and have a baseball leave his bat at over 100 miles an hour. There's a reason Shohei Ohtani is worth so much money, and we talk about a pitcher being worth so much and it being the reason why we're not seeing a lot of pitching free agents that are big names go to certain teams yet, is because they want to wait and see what happens with Shohei Ohtani. I think that's a reason why we're not seeing a bunch of power bats be traded or a bunch of power bats be signed during free agency, because the same can be said for the pitching argument for Shohei Ohtani. Because of the type of bat that he has and is going to have in whatever team gets him, you make the same argument. Say he's worth $590 million. And some player who's in free agency has a similar bat to Shohei Ohtani. They don't have the pitching, obviously, but they've got the kind of power and the ability to hit the ball like Shohei Ohtani. That turns their $10 to $15 million value to $15 to $20 million in value per year. So that's the reason why I believe we're not seeing a lot, because if it was Shohei Ohtani and he was, say, the best pitcher in major leagues and didn't have the bat as well, you would see the pitching market kind of at a standstill, and you'd see the pitching market kind of frozen right now. You'd see a lot of the bats, and you'd see a lot of the position players probably already signing deals and probably already figuring out where they're going. But Shohei Ohtani is a phenomenal pitcher, and he's phenomenal at the plate. That's why I think we're seeing a complete freeze when it comes down to the pitching market especially, but also the power market as well when it comes to players in free agency, because you're seeing some of those players go here and there and everywhere, but you're not seeing as many as you mentioned. It hasn't been, we're starting to see where players are going. It's starting to kick off pretty quick once winter meetings are underway. That's why we haven't been seeing it on both the offense and defensive sides of the baseball so far in this offseason. It's because Shohei Ohtani has not decided and has not come to a conclusion is where he's going to be playing baseball next year.
And Matt, not to mention, we talk about the pitching market going to take a hit and going to increase once Shohei Ohtani signs with whoever he signs with. But this offseason, Matt, I think that the starting pitching market has already increased as well. Aaron Nola signed a 7-year deal for $172 million, just south of $25 million per year. Sonny Gray, 3 years, he's $75 million over those 3 years. That's $25 million per year. And to me, Matt, this one, Luis Severino, he's staying in New York, but he's going from the Yankees to the Mets on a 1-year deal for $13 million. So we've already started to see the starting pitching market start to increase for a lot of these high-name and big-name pitchers. So really, what's that going to translate to when Shohei Ohtani goes and tries to get his big name, because he's one of not just the best pitchers in Major League Baseball, but he's also one of the best hitters in Major League Baseball as well.
And yeah, that's why I brought up the idea of we haven't seen the market as a whole really do too much since winter meetings started, is because he's got that bat as well. But you talk about that Aaron Nola deal. You talk about some of the other pitchers like Sonny Gray that have already been picked up and already signed to 2 teams during free agency. It's safe to say that those teams that were able to pick up those players, the Phillies obviously re-signing Aaron Nola to the team. Obviously, you've got Sonny Gray going to the Cardinals. The reason that it's so good for those teams to have done that already is because I'm not saying that it would have been guaranteed to be this way, but say the Cardinals wait until Shohei Ohtani gets dealt to whatever team he gets dealt to. Who's to say Sonny Gray doesn't go out and say, hey, instead of $25 million a year, I think I'm worth $28 million a year. That's an extra $3 million a year. That equates to $9 million total dollars. So you go from a 3-year $75 million deal to a 3-year $84 million deal. It's obviously, for Major League Baseball teams without the salary cap, that's not anything completely insane, but it's still a ton of money that you can use towards another player that could have been used to pick up another player for, say, a year or 2 on a contract. So you talk about the type of money that Shohei Ohtani is going to be worth, because I honestly do believe that $500 million plus, depending on how long the deal is, if it's a 5-year $500 million, I do not think that's worth it at all, because that means you're giving him $100 million a year. But if it's a $500 million 8 to 10 year contract, whatever team decides to pick up Shohei Ohtani, if it's for an 8 to 10 year contract and he's able to play through those 8 to 10 years, I think he's worth every penny of it.
He'll sell himself.
Exactly. He will prove why he's worth that much money because of what he's able to do pitching-wise and what he's able to do hitting-wise. The big question is going to be, and you brought it up too, because we're not going to know until it happens. What's the market going to be like after a team decides to shovel up the money and fork up the money to get Shohei Ohtani on their roster?
Sorry, Matt, didn't mean to cut you off, but when I was saying that he sells himself, Who's the face of Major League Baseball? Shohei Ohtani. Think about having the face of Major League Baseball play for your team. Think about jersey prices. Think about ticket sales. Think about ticket sales and more of a home, quote unquote, home field advantage when you're on the road because you're going to have more fans in the stands rooting for him. He sells himself. And Matt, not to mention the fact that once Shohei Ohtani sells and signs with a team, depending on how much that is, if the market boosts for a lot of these pitchers, I mean, let's be honest, there's nobody worth Shohei Ohtani. Shohei Ohtani is worth the most in Major League Baseball. At least he should be worth the most. He's the number one player right now in Major League Baseball. And I don't think there's any if or ands or buts about it. When you look at what Shohei Ohtani can do, he can get it done both ways. Matt, I also would expect the trade market to take a huge hit once Shohei Ohtani. There's going to be a lot of teams looking at the trade block. There are going to be a lot of teams dishing some teams that are competing. And the reason why we're talking about this right now is because right now we foresee the Reds competing in 2024. So I think that the Reds, they're going to start, and a lot of the other teams like the Reds, they're going to start utilizing the trade market as well, because guess what? You can bring in quality pitchers that are still on that deal that they signed before the market's going to inflate with Shohei Ohtani. The market's going to inflate once Ohtani signs, so the trade market is going to take a huge hit. There's going to be a lot of trades being made because a lot of the teams in contention, they're going to want to get top-tier pitchers that are maybe coming up on a year or two left on their contracts, but they're still under contract under the amount that they're still owed.
Yeah, obviously, when you go to those kinds of trades and you deal with those types of, I wouldn't say issues, but when you deal with all of that, you take a look at the market, and if the market increases, it's kind of a good but a bad thing. It's kind of a catch-22 type deal. You've got the ability to have a player under their pre-existing contract, which is going to be a lot less than if you go out and try to sign a free agent with potentially the same value as the pitcher that you get off of that trade. But you're also going to have to end up forking up more to get that pitcher as well. So it's kind of a, do you want to deal with paying the pitcher less money but also giving up a little bit more to get them? Or do you want to bite the bullet and go ahead and pay a little bit more to get a free agent pitcher that's worth roughly the same on the field as the pitcher that you might end up trading for? So it's kind of it's a good but a bad thing for a team if they're deciding to, if they decide to trade and pay a player, a pitcher, more the better example, under a pre-existing contract, because you're going to be paying them less, but you're probably going to have to give up more to get that type of talent.
And Matt, you take a look at also what can happen. Well, there's going to be a lot of expensive pitchers coming up. There is one pitcher that comes to mind that I personally think you can get for cheap. He's running back in the MLB. He was one of the top pitchers while pitching in the majors. His name is clear. His name's Trevor Bauer. He came up in some Reds talk over the last weekend. We're getting to that here in a second. First time for a break. It's 4:48 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll be back in a few on Sports Now.
At McAfee, we understand that life doesn't stop when something in your home breaks down. Our customers count on us to be there, ready when they need us.
Is there anything else you need from me?
No, sir, I have all the information I need.
Great, thanks. Just lock the door on the way out.
Thank you.
Let us get your home up and running again. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. At McAfee, we understand that life doesn't stop when something in your home breaks down. Our customers count on us to be there, ready when they need us.
Is there anything else you need from me?
No, sir, I have all the information I need.
Great, thanks. Just lock the door on the way out.
Thank you.
Let us get your home up and running again. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
We welcome you back here to Sports Now. Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington. We're talking some Major League Baseball. There's a lot of rumors circling around that Trevor Bauer, he is wanting back in the Major Leagues. Obviously, a couple years ago, after winning the National League Cy Young in a Cincinnati Reds uniform, he ran into some legal issues. Last season, I believe it was July time, his name was cleared, and he is looking to get back into major leagues. That is a quality pitcher that can come into your rotation and can also come in for cheap as well. Cheaper than what he's worth. Not cheap, because when you're talking millions of dollars, it's not cheap. That's something that, Matt, you and I can't afford. But when you look at what... let me go back to that. It's something that we can't afford. We got in the wrong career. But... nonetheless, when you look at, so it's not cheap, but it's a cheaper option than the pitching market right now. Asked this weekend on December 2nd, Gordon Wittenmeyer from the Cincinnati Enquirer, he went out and said that Nick Krall on a possible Trevor Bauer return, Nick Krall says he does not see that as an option.
Well, I hope it ends up switching from not being an option to being an option that's on the table. I mean, I might have a little bit more bias towards Trevor Bauer because I enjoyed watching him when he was in a Reds uniform. I even enjoyed watching him when he was in a Dodgers uniform a little bit. But that's a player you mentioned. He's been playing in Japan for the past few seasons, or the past few MLB seasons. He hasn't been in the league. He's still got that type of arm talent. If you watch some of his stuff over in Japan, he's still got that kind of arm talent that he did when he won the National League Cy Young Award. So it's totally possible that he could come back into the major leagues. I'm not saying he goes immediately back to his Cleveland days or his winning the Cy Young as a Red days, but it's very possible that give him a year, give him maybe up to 2 to 3 years, he ends up getting close to those kinds of numbers again. Because if there's one player, I mean, that's another thing that I liked about Trevor Bauer. He does not stop working towards a goal. If he wants to win, if he comes back to the Reds and he wants to win another National League Cy Young Award, he is going to grind to get to that point. That was another reason that I liked Trevor Bauer when he was with the Reds, because I was able to see and realize that this man does not back down. He does not give up. That's one of the reasons he was able to get himself out of the legal trouble, is because he did not back down. He did not give up on what he thought was right and what he thought was his goal. And at that time, his goal was to clear the legal troubles, which he was able to do. So it's one thing with Trevor Bauer that some people don't like his attitude. Some people don't like him because of the whole ordeal that went down with the legal issues and all that. But his name has been cleared. I liked what his attitude was when he was with Cincinnati because, like I said, he had that winner mentality, and he had that mentality of, I have a goal set for myself, and I am not going to stop until I get it done. And that's the type of player that, I'm not saying Cincinnati doesn't already have that, because there's a few players that come to my mind and that pop up in my head when you say they strive towards a goal and they don't back down until they get that goal. I think Trevor Bauer in Cincinnati would be pretty good. It would be a pretty good fit for this team. Obviously, like you said, the talks and the conversations and the points right now are it's more likely he's not going to be back for the Reds or not going to be back in a Reds uniform. It's more likely that it's not going to be the case than it is. But still, that doesn't mean I wouldn't like seeing Trevor Bauer back in a Reds uni.
And Matt, we take a look at Trevor Bauer, and yes, you and I are both advocates for get Trevor Bauer back to the Queen City of Cincinnati. But obviously, if Nick Kroll does not see him fitting this team, we have to trust him. And Nick Kroll, over the last couple of years, the general manager for the Cincinnati Reds, he has built a championship caliber roster. Well, maybe not quite yet, but he's getting there. We take a look at all the young prospects. He was the one that made all the trade deals to bring in these young prospects that almost took the Cincinnati Reds to the playoffs last season. You go out this offseason, you add to your depth, you add to that starting rotation, your championship caliber squad. So Nick Kroll has always had that vision set in stone over the last couple of years. If Trevor Bauer does not fit within that vision, then obviously don't bring him back. But I do think that the Cincinnati Reds, if they do not go for Trevor Bauer, they need to go out and pursue a veteran arm, and not just any arm, a top arm in Major League Baseball via trade, via free agency. They need to get some veteran experience and some veteran leadership in that starting rotation, because right now your oldest guy in that starting rotation is Nick Martinez, but he's also can swing both ways. You could throw him in the bullpen as well, and if he is in the starting rotation, he's pitcher number 5. So outside of Nick Martinez, your most experienced pitcher on your team is Hunter Green, and Hunter Green has only played 2 years in Major League Baseball. You need some veteran experience on that pitching staff. We talked about this a lot during October. If you want to go far during October baseball, you have to rely on your pitching staff. That's exactly what the Texas Rangers were able to do. That's why they brought in players such as Aroldis Chapman, Max Scherzer. That's exactly what we were able to see from the Arizona Diamondbacks with Zach Gallen. And then you take a look at the Phillies with Ace 1A and Ace 1B, Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler. A lot of the teams that made deep postseason runs, ultimately, they had star pitching. And not just star pitching, pitching depth. The Reds, they've already bolstered up that bullpen. I love what they've done to the bullpen, especially if they slide Nick Martinez into that bullpen role. But if you're not going to pursue Trevor Bauer, you at least have to go pursue a veteran name, a veteran presence in that starting 5 pitching rotation, not just a veteran presence, but also one who I would say has to have postseason experience as well.
And yeah, that's one thing we've been talking about quite a bit with this Cincinnati Reds team that they need to try to focus on during this offseason if they want to have their best chances of being successful this upcoming season. And that's just working on the pitching. That's been the biggest struggle, at least in the past few seasons, I would say, for the Cincinnati Reds team. It's been the pitching. If the Reds can figure that out, they are by far, I would say, one of the, if not the favorites to win the NL Central, and maybe even in conversation to make it to the World Series at the start of the year. I'm not just talking about later on in the year we see them start to climb their way up and they might be in talks of being a top team, being a team that makes it into the playoff or makes it run to the World Series. I'm talking about this Reds team preseason favorites to win the NL Central. I'm talking about this Reds team being a preseason top 5 to 10 team when it comes to their chances and their odds of making it to the World Series. That's one thing the Reds have not had the luxury of being able to have set at the start of the year for quite some time now. So this Reds team, especially with the young talent that they have and with the limited window that they have to have all of these young players under the contracts that they're under right now, you have got to be in a win-now mentality. You have to go out and get that veteran arm to help teach and help get these younger pitchers in the rotation more comfortable with themselves, more confident in themselves, and more confident in their ability to pitch in the major leagues. And if you can do that, you're only going to make this Reds team more successful. You're only going to help this team as time goes on, and you're only going to better the Reds as an organization.
Time for a break. We're moving to hour number 2 coming up next here on this 2-hour show. We're live till 6. We'll be back in a few.
At McAfee, we understand that life doesn't stop when something in your home breaks down. Our customers count on us to be there, ready when they need us.
Is there anything else you need from me?
No, sir, I have all the information I need.
Great, thanks. Just lock the door on the way out.
Thank you.
Let us get your home up and running again. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. It's easy to take the air in your home for granted. But it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. It's easy to take the air in your home for granted. But it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Just another reminder, folks, if anybody is looking to sponsor and put your company name right here on Sports Now, we have multiple ad spots available. Make sure to hit us up at the TKDS Sports Network. Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington. We move into hour number 2 of this 2-hour show. We are live until 6, and let's shift our focus now to college basketball. We've already talked about the NFL, Cincinnati, the Bengals getting a big win, the MLS Cup coming up this upcoming Saturday, and we just talked about some MLB baseball as well in their offseason. But Matt, let's go into and let's talk about some college basketball and a little bit of an overview for college basketball because, Matt, there was a lot of upsets that happened this weekend. Northwestern took down Purdue 92-88. That game, Purdue, remember, they were ranked number 1 in the entire nation heading into that one. Lost by 4. Kansas took down UConn a 5-4. Not necessarily an upset, but still a notable game to be talking about. And then, of course, when you take a look at our games that were played on Saturday, Duke ended up losing to Georgia Tech. Wisconsin ended up taking down Marquette. There were just a lot going on in college basketball. Busy weekend, a lot of upsets, and that ultimately shakes up the NCAA college basketball rankings because Arizona, now they jump to the 1 spot, Kansas to the 2, Houston to the 3, Purdue drops to 4, UConn drops to 5. Or UConn, I beg your pardon, stays at 5.
Tell you what, with the past few years, though, with college basketball, it feels like there's always 1 or 2 weekends that are like this where just everything goes crazy and nothing is as it should be in college basketball. I mean, you didn't even mention UNC Wilmington taking down Kentucky on the road. You didn't even mention the game where UNC played against Tennessee. Both of those teams, I believe at the time, were top 15 teams, and 192 points were scored in that game. Then you have Virginia also taking down Texas A&M, Colorado State taking down Colorado. It's just been, I would say insanity isn't the best way to put it, because like I said, it's happened a few times in the past few years where you just have that 1 week where it seems like everything is just going to go crazy. It started off with, I would say, Purdue losing to Northwestern in OT. It felt like that was kind of the spark that lit this weekend ablaze in college basketball, because you've got that game and then obviously a close game between UConn and Kansas. Those are 2 current top 5 teams. Kansas is now number 2. UConn is number 5. That one, a 4-point game. You would expect it to play out that way. You wouldn't expect Kansas to take down UConn by 30-plus points or whatever, but then I brought up the Purdue-Northwestern game. It seemed like that lit the match that was going to spark the fire that happened over the weekend. And then Saturday decided to happen. Wisconsin taking down Marquette, Georgia Tech taking down Duke, UNC Wilmington taking down Kentucky. It was craziness, to say the least, back on Saturday.
Yeah, and you take a look at some of the teams that are within the top 25. And Matt, one thing I want to talk about, the Ohio State Buckeyes, if you were to extend the top 25 poll right now, they would be ranked the number 27 team, according to the AP poll, in the entire nation. Ohio State, remember, this is a team last year, missed March Madness, missed tournaments in general. They struggled last season, especially in conference play. Ohio State, they're on a 7-game winning streak after dropping their first game of the year to Texas A&M. Texas A&M, they lost that game by 7. They were number 15 when they played them. Texas A&M, that's a very, very good basketball team. Since then, Ohio State, they've beaten some good teams, such as Alabama, such as they took down Minnesota, big win against Central Michigan as well. They now play Miami of Ohio tomorrow at 7 p.m. That game will be played in Columbus, Ohio, but Ohio State, with all the movement in the top 25, they benefit from it because now they're only 2 spots out from being ranked in the top 25. Matt, if you were to come to me and talk to me about the Ohio State Buckeyes being ranked this early in college basketball, I would not have believed you, because on how many players they lost and also because of how their season went last season. The Ohio State Buckeyes, they played tremendous. They're on a 7-game winning streak. And hey, you win these 2 games against Miami and then against Penn State to close out the week. That game will be played on Saturday. You win both those games, in my opinion, you will be entering the CBS Sports Classic next Saturday ranked in the top 25.
And it's actually only a 6-game win streak for Ohio State. They beat Oakland in Game 1, then lost to Texas A&M, but still, the only thing that is a little bit unfortunate for the Buckeyes is the fact that Texas A&M continues to play some pretty tough teams, and they've now lost 2 games on the year. They played Florida Atlantic, lost that game by 7. They played Virginia, the last game that they played on the season, lost that game by 12. Virginia not ranked, but they're another team that I think is in that conversation of being inside the top 25. If I'm not mistaken, I think they're actually that team in 26th in when it comes down to if you were to extend the rankings past 25. But yeah, that loss to Florida Atlantic for Texas A&M bumped them down a little bit, but then that loss to Virginia knocked them down a little bit further. But they've got DePaul and then Memphis coming up for the next 2 games for the Aggies, and then they've got a home game against Houston. I think that's where the schedule's really going to get tough for the Aggies, but you take a look at the fact that Ohio State got a close loss to Texas A&M, a current top 25 team, and then you take a further look at the fact that they ended up taking down Alabama, who at the time was a ranked team. I think it's only a matter of time before this Ohio State Buckeyes basketball team can start making their way towards the top 25 and being a team inside the top 25 as opposed to being just on the bubble.
And Matt, I will say this upcoming Saturday, there is a big game. It is the Skyline Chili Crosstown Shootout. It'll be in Cincinnati. The Xavier Musketeers will take on the Cincinnati Bearcats. Matt, Cincinnati, they have yet to suffer their first loss on the season. They have played their closest game. They played that last Tuesday, a 5-point win over Howard in OT. Outside of that 5-point win, Cincinnati, this team, they've won every other game by at least 11 or more points outside of that one game against Howard. UC, obviously, they have not played the toughest of schedules. They've played UIC, Detroit Mercy, Eastern Washington, Northern Kentucky, Georgia Tech, Howard, and Florida Gulf Coast. And out of all those schools, only one of those schools coming from a Power 5 conference, with that being Georgia Tech. So when you look at what UC has done, yes, they have not played the toughest of schedules, but Matt, they've also beaten opponents how they should. We talk about that time in and time out on this show. You have got to beat opponents how they are supposed to beat them. They've certainly done that. Cincinnati, Xavier, they have played a very tough schedule. They've played Purdue. They've played Washington. They've played Houston. The Cincinnati, although Xavier is sitting at 4-4, if Cincinnati is able to go in and take care of business against Xavier and not only beat them, but maybe beat them by 10 or more points, this is a team that we can also start making a case and start making an argument that can end up in the top 25. It wouldn't happen next week, but I do think that they would be mentioned as an honorable mention just on the outside looking in if they're able to take it to Xavier this week and win to advance to 8-0.
Yeah, especially when you take a look at this Xavier Musketeers team and you take a look at how they've been able to play so far this year. Obviously, the record, I would say 4-4 doesn't show how good Xavier has been so far this year, because you take a look at the games they've lost. Lost to number 2 Purdue, number 6 Houston at the time they played both of those games. And then we talked about how good Oakland has looked so far this year. I mean, you take a look at Oakland this year. They played Ohio State, a team that is 7-1 on the year, a Power 5 team, only lost that game by 6. So this Oakland team, 78-76, that's the kind of game that Xavier would like to come away with. But with how good Oakland has looked so far this year, I'd say the Golden Grizzlies are a team that they're only 4-5 right now, but they have really heavily loaded the front half of the schedule. I mean, you take a look at the Golden Grizzlies on this season. They've got Ohio State on the schedule. They've got Illinois on the schedule in the early stages of the year. They had Bowling Green that they ended up taking down. They did lose to Drake, but then they've got Marshall and Xavier also on their roster, and they won both of those games. So this Golden Grizzlies team, you might think that, oh, it's just Oakland. Oakland's not as good as Xavier. They're not in as tough of a conference as Xavier. It doesn't matter. That front half of the schedule for the Golden Grizzlies so far this year has been a tough slate of games, and they've come out of it with a pretty decent record. And you take a look at the losses for Xavier on the year. I mentioned the loss to Purdue. That was a 12-point game. Purdue, one of the top teams in the country right now. Obviously, they just lost to Northwestern, but it's Big Ten conference play. That's going to happen to the top teams. Purdue was a top team in the country last year, and I think they lost at least 2 to 3 Big Ten games at the end of the regular season. 3-point loss to Washington, another game that, if you're the Musketeers, you're a little bit upset that you came just short on, as well as that game with Oakland. And then a 6-point loss to Houston, who I believe now is the number 3 team in the entire nation. This Musketeers team, they are a lot better. Their 4-4 record does not tell how good this team truly is.
I completely agree with that. And you look at their out-of-conference schedule, there's a reason why Xavier is so good. It seems like Xavier every single year is wrote off in the Big East. They enter the March Madness tournament not necessarily as a higher. I know that over the last couple of years they've been a higher seed, but even when the years that they've entered as a middle of the pack seed, they've always been able to make a deep postseason run and a deep tournament run to the Sweet 16, to the Elite Eight, to the Final Four, and it's because Xavier is battle tested. Every single year, their out-of-conference record does not look necessarily great, but you look at the teams that they play out of conference, the Xavier Musketeers are going to be okay. And Matt, let me ask you this question. Would we be talking about a 5-3 Xavier team? Obviously, they're 4-4, but say last Friday in the Big East Big 12 battle, they were able to take down Houston, and say they were able to win that. They lost that game 66-60. Say they were able to win that game 66-60. In my mind, Xavier is just on the bubble of being a top 25 team, even with those 3 losses. That's how tough of an out-of-conference schedule that Xavier's played. They have a matchup coming up against Delaware tonight. Should be a win. And then Cincinnati, the Skyline Chili Crosstown Shootout. That is a big game for both UC and Xavier when it comes to trying to make a case to be in the top 25.
I would say Xavier wouldn't be in the conversation for top 25, but the only reason they wouldn't be is because how many close one-loss teams there are to being inside the top 25 that aren't. Ohio State, like you mentioned, if you extended the rankings down past 25, they would be 27, and they're a 7-1 team. It's a lot better of a record, obviously. You take a look at the schedules between both two teams. It's safe to say Xavier has a little bit tougher of a schedule than Ohio State does, but Ohio State also has had a pretty tough schedule so far this season. So I would say Xavier wouldn't be in the conversation for being a top 25 team, but that's the one thing with Xavier. You talk about the past few years, their seeding for March Madness has been pretty good. That's one thing with Xavier, though. Their down years are them barely missing March, barely missing the March Madness tournament. And that's the crazy thing for this Musketeers team. If your bad year is being one of the first 4 out or just barely missing the tournament, it goes to show how good of a program you have. If your years that you aren't playing as good as you usually do, you're still in the conversation for making it into the March Madness tournament. Obviously, there's still a lot of time before we figure out whether Xavier's going to be in or not. But in I'd say the past 10 or so years, the bad years for Xavier has been one of the first 4 out or one of the first 10 or so teams out of March Madness, and they make it into the NIT tournament, and they end up being a team that's dominating that tournament as well. So for Xavier, obviously, you don't want this. You don't want it to come down to this. You want to end up being a team that makes it into March. But playing in the Big East Conference, it's safe to say if Xavier makes it in, they are going to be a team you got to watch out for no matter who you are playing against them.
And Matt, not to mention the fact that Xavier, their 4 losses on the season, just because of their tough out-of-conference schedule, they will be ranked and they will have priority over some teams. If they keep winning, if they go on a 10-game win streak or so, they'll have priorities even with those 4 losses and some 3 or possibly 2 lost teams just because of the caliber teams that they've lost to. And also, you talk about Oakland, that tough loss to Oakland. That's a glaring loss on that schedule. They lost by 2, but Oakland, they're very good. We're going to talk about them a lot on this show because they're one of the favorites in the Horizon League. Guess who else is in the Horizon League? The Wright State Raiders. Guess who we're talking about next? Wright State Raiders. That's coming up next here on Sports Now.
Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
We welcome you back here to Sports Now. Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington. Let's talk some Wright State Raiders. And the Wright State Raiders basketball so far this season, they have had a up and down year. And the reason why I say up and down year, they're 3-5, but they have won. They have won a couple of they've won 2 out of their last 3, and actually they've won 3 out of their last 5 games. For the Wright State Raiders, they're starting to try to turn around this season before heading into conference play.
And yeah, another thing that is good for Wright State as well, when you talk about the fact that they've won 3 of their last 5 games, is one of those games was a conference game, and they won that game 103-74 against IUPUI. The reason that that's such a good win is because that's the very first conference game for Wright State on the year. It gets them to 1-0 in conference play. Obviously, the overall record is not what you'd like it to be, but when you take a look at the teams that Wright State has played so far this year, and you see that they had a road game against Davidson, a road game against Indiana, and a road game against, I think, number 13 right now, Colorado State, all those games being losses, it's safe to say that is a pretty tough start to the year for this Wright State Raiders team, and it's going to be a lot tougher competition than they're going to see in their Horizon League. And then you've got the loss to Toledo, that game. You take a look at all the turnovers, the points off of turnovers for the Rockets. That was a game that Wright State should have never lost. And then the game against Hofstra, pretty decent team themselves, so that was a tough loss for Wright State. But take a look at the wins against Louisiana, the wins against Illinois State, and the wins against IUPUI. You have a close win against the Ragin' Cajuns, won that game by 6, and then dominant wins against Illinois State and IUPUI. They've got another game coming up in 2 days against Bethel out of Indiana, and then they've got Western Kentucky, Miami of Ohio, Muskingum, and then they get back into conference play with their second conference game of the year on the road against Green Bay. That's when we're going to truly start seeing what this Wright State team is going to be capable of, because for the Raiders, and pretty much for the entire Horizon League, it's been the case for the Horizon League for the past few years, well, a majority of the time when it comes down to making it into March Madness, you've got to win the conference tournament at the end of the year if you want to make it in. Rarely have we seen in the Horizon League 2 teams making it in, an at-large and a conference champion and a tournament champion at the end of the year. So it's safe to say once we see this Wright State team start making their run through conference play, I would say the only team inside of the Horizon League right now that would really have a chance of making it as an at-large team would be Purdue Fort Wayne, because they're 8-1 on the season right now. And even then, with the fact that they're in the Horizon League, we've seen how the decisions have been made. If you're in a lower conference, even if you run the gauntlet, end up losing the tournament, there's a decent chance you're not going to end up making it in. If there's struggles in the Atlantic 10 for teams that are at large to make it in, what do you think those struggles are going to be like for a team inside of the inside of the Horizon League to try to make it in to March Madness? So once we see this Wright State team start getting more into conference play, especially with the fact that a majority of their upcoming games, there's a very good shot we see them winning. They should win against Bethel. They should win against. They should fare well against Western Kentucky. Miami of Ohio should be another good game. Muskingum should be another good game. Once we see them start getting into that conference play, though, when they face off against Green Bay on the road, that's where we're going to start seeing, from that moment on pretty much, that's when we're going to start seeing what this Wright State Raiders team is going to be about and what they are going to be able to do. Because if they can get themselves to a pretty decent seed inside of the Horizon League going into the tournament, it's only going to help them when it comes to their chances of making it into the March Madness tournament.
And Matt, not to mention, you summed it up perfectly there, partner. When you look at the Horizon League, you have got to win that conference to make it in to March Madness. Purdue Fort Wayne, right now, they're the favorites. And to be honest, Can they be knocked off? Absolutely. Do I see it happening? Not anytime soon, but it's still the beginning of the year. Still a lot of basketball to be played even before we sniff the championship tournaments and the NCAA tournament, the conference tournaments. There's so much time in between now and then. I mean, we haven't even hit Christmas time yet. So there's still a lot left in this season. But Wright State, yes, they're 3-5, but this is a team that can ultimately turn it around. They have 4 players that are averaging double-digit amount of scoring. Those players being Trey Calvin, Tanner Holden, Brandon Noel, and A.J. Braun. 4 of those players average 11 or more points. There's not many schools in the entire nation that can say that they have 4 scorers that average more than 11 points. Not to mention Trey Calvin, he's over 20 points as well. So it's not like they're all just sitting stagnant at 11 points per game. You have some variation in there as well. This is a great scoring offense when you look at what the amount of points that they put up. 77 in back-to-back games. 80, 91, 76, 74, 103, then 73. There's no question about it. This is a Wright State Raiders team that can put up points and can score at will. But here's the question. Can their defense step up? And Matt, I know we talked about it a lot back on the last week of the show, maybe a couple weeks ago. But Wright State, can they get that defense to step up? The points that they've allowed this season, 105, 78, 89, 85, 85, 49, 74, 82. They need to step up that defensive side. They have got to quit turning the ball over on the offensive side. They've gotten better at that as the season's gone on. And Matt, ultimately, we mentioned the first couple of games of the year against Colorado State, Toledo, and Indiana. Well, maybe they just got beat because those are really good shooting teams. But when you see a common trend as we head into, they're going to be playing their 9th game of the season coming up on Thursday night, I beg your pardon, against Bethel, at home against Wright State. When you see all the 8 previous teams you've played consistently shooting the ball better and consistently shooting lights out outside of Illinois State, that proves to show me Wright State, they're not hustling on the defensive side. They're not getting their hands up to try to defend. They're not playing pressure and not playing tough defense. They're relying on that offense. Wright State, they start playing better defense. They continue playing this well, and on the offensive side of the ball, on the offensive side of the floor, this is a Wright State Raiders team that can win the Horizon League. Not only that, but can also make some noise. Wright State, they've been playing some better basketball. Again, I mentioned winners 3 out of their last 5 games. They're 3-5 on the season. Bethel, Western Kentucky, Miami, Muskingum, all coming up. 4 out of conference games before they get into the thicker Horizon League schedule. I think that the Wright State Raiders, they can get some much-needed out-of-conference wins and have momentum for that December 29th matchup against Green Bay.
And yeah, that was one thing I was talking about when it came down to the points per game for this team. We had, obviously, Trey Calvin a week ago. I think it was averaging 23.2 a game. And then we had, I think it was Tanner Holden who was in second. He still is. But I think it was down to around 12.5 to 13 points a game. Since then, Trey Calvin's numbers have dropped to 21.1 points per game. Tanner Holden is up to 14.9 points per game. And I talked about with this team, you obviously love having 4 players all sitting at over 10 points a game, over 11 points per game to be exact. A.J. Braun has 11.1 points per game on this season, and I can't not mention Brandon Noel, who's got 12.8 points as well. It wouldn't do justice talking about Trey Calvin, Tanner Holden, A.J. Braun, and leaving Brandon Noel out. He's the other player that is averaging over 10 points a game. But I talked about with this Wright State team, it's obvious when you take a look at the points per game, Trey Calvin wasn't putting up the same numbers as he was this past week or so since we last talked about this Wright State team. I brought up the fact that obviously you love having a player that is as explosive and is as able to score as Trey Calvin, but when you have players like him not able to produce at the high level that they usually do, you're going to have players behind him step up. And you take a look at the points per game, Tanner Holden stepped up. Obviously, Trey Calvin is still averaging a ton of points in a week, going from 23.2 to 21.1. You didn't score nearly as much. You were still scoring a ton, but you weren't putting up your same 23-plus points a game numbers. And Tanner Holden went from around, like I said, 13 or so points per game up to almost 15 points a game. That's one thing that I take from looking at the points per game for these players from a week ago to today. it's one thing you're going to love seeing from this Wright State team. Obviously, you talk about the defense. That's something that just as a whole needs to improve for this team. It's not just one player that needs to improve. It's whole defense that needs to improve. But the fact that you see Trey Calvin's numbers in points per game go down a little bit and Tanner Holden's go up at the exact same time, it's exactly what you want to see from this Wright State team, because it shows that if Trey Calvin has one of those days where he's not able to put up as many points, you know you're going to have a player like Tanner Holden or Brandon Noel or A.J. Brown step up and be able to fill those shoes and get those extra points that Trey Calvin is not going to be able to on any given night.
The Wright State Raiders, a big game on Thursday night at the Nutter Center against Bethel, trying to get back to 500. They're 3-5. They're 2 games below, but again, Wright State, very tough out-of-conference schedule. We're talking about the University of Dayton and the Flyers coming up next when we return here to Sports Now.
Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
We welcome you back here to Sports Now. Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington. Let's talk about the UD Flyers. UD Flyers at home tomorrow night against UNLV. A little bit of a tongue twister here on this Tuesday.
For you, it is. UNLV is not that difficult for me to say.
Well, good for you, Matt. Wonderful for you.
I deserve a cookie for that.
5:35 p.m. Eastern Time. We're talking about the UD Flyers and their basketball season thus far. And the UD Flyers, Matt, there was a lot of skepticism from myself, not necessarily on your end, but for myself before the season. And it was mainly because of the uncertainty surrounding the bench. Well, the Flyers this season, they sit 6-2. Their only 2 losses to Northwestern and Houston, Northwestern, they just took down the number 1 team in college basketball, being Purdue on Friday. Houston, they're, of course, number 3 right now. They lost by 14 to that one. The UD Flyers have proven that they can hang with anyone and they can beat anyone as well. Couple of tough games coming up. UNLV, Troy, Cincinnati, Oakland, Longwood, and then they're in the A10 conference play.
And yeah, it's one thing that we talked about when it came down to this UD Flyers team. The big question was going to be, obviously, you've got the starters, you've got the players that are supposed to start for this team. Obviously, a wrench got thrown into that when Malachi Smith went down with a season-ending injury 7 minutes into the very first game of the season. But it's safe to say Javon Bennett stepped up. He's the man that has stepped up and taken those starting spots. The starting spot from Malachi Smith, he's got 7 starts on the season. He's averaging 6.8 points per game. But how about Nate Santos? 13.5 points per game so far this year. And then probably going to be Atlantic 10 6 man of the year, if you want to give it to him already. Kobe Brea coming off the bench. He has not started a game this season, averaging 12.3 points in 26 minutes per game so far this season. He's averaging 12.3 points. He's averaging 26 minutes on the floor. It's safe to say Kobe Brea right now is a huge, huge piece to this UD Flyers team.
And Matt, at the beginning of the year, I expected Kobe Brea to be in the starting 5 for UD. Then he did not start in the first game. Malachi Smith went down. I expected Kobe Brea would move in to that 5th starter role, and he'd be the starter number 5 for the University of Dayton the rest of the season. That is not the case. Javon Bennett has stepped into that role. But Kobe Brea, there's a reason why they have him coming off the bench. And Matt, sometimes the starting 5 is not necessarily the best 5 players on your team. You have to remember it's a 40-minute game, 2 20-minute halves, so you're doing a lot of running back and forth. You have got to be able to substitute in and out your players at a consistent time and at the right time to be able to continue some runs, and therefore you don't go on an ice-cold spell where all of your 5 best players on the floor are on the bench. Kobe Brea, without a doubt, in my mind, is one of the best or one of the top 5 players for the UD Flyers. I'd say one of the 3 best players for the University of Dayton this season. I put him up there with Deron Holmes and Nate Santos. Kobe Brea this season, the reason why he has not gotten any starts, again, is because with him coming off, providing those 6-man minutes, that means he's able to come off and give Javon Bennett, Kobe Elvis, Nate Santos, Deron Holmes, anybody who you want, some time off and a quick breather. Kobe Brea, keeping him out of the starting rotation, starting lineup, keeps some of the stars such as Nate Santos, Deron Holmes as your 1-2 punch in your starting 5. Kobe Brea coming off the bench, he's able to add some valuable minutes and some valuable points and some valuable plays off the bench. I like that move from Dayton. The beginning of the season, I wasn't a big fan of it, but head coach Anthony Grant knew that Dayton, they would need some depth this season if they wanted to compete. That's a perfect way to drop Kobe Brea from being in your starting rotation and starting 5 down to your 6-man, because it's worked out great for the University of Dayton this season.
And yeah, there's one stat when I take a look at what Kobe Brea has done. You also got to give props to Nate Santos as well. When you have, the reason I bring this up is because we're a decent chunk of the way into the season already. Take a look at the 3-point shooting percentage by Kobe Brea and Nate Santos this year. Kobe Brea is 25 of 52 from 3. That is 48% from 3 on the season. And then you've got Nate Santos, 16 of 24. That's almost 67% from 3. The reason that's so shocking is because the UD Flyers are 8 games into the season, and they're averaging that percentage from 3. Those are big numbers. Obviously, as the season goes on, those numbers are probably going to start dwindling down, and they're going to start going down. But usually you'd see those numbers by players that might step in here or there and might have those kinds of numbers 2 to 3 games into the season. And then they might hit a dry spell and their numbers start going down. But we're 8 games into the year, and you have a 66.7% from 3 for Nate Santos and a 48.1% from 3 for Kobe Brea. Kobe Brea has shot over 50 three-point attempts this season. That is insane numbers, an insane completion on those three-point shots for Kobe Brea and Nate Santos. And like I said, at around this time of the year, you would expect him to maybe be around, if they're the efficient three-point shooters like we've seen, you'd expect him to maybe be around 40%, maybe creeping up towards 50. Kobe Brea's got over 50 attempts, and he's close to 50% from three. And then Nate Santos has 24 attempts, and he is 66.7% from three this season. Those numbers are insane.
And Matt, you talk about players who have stepped up. I'm going with Nate Santos, just as you mentioned, not only the three-point shooting percentage, but you look at what Nate Santos has been able to bring to the table, especially over the last couple of weeks. This is a guy that has put up multiple points against double-digit points against some very good teams. I'm going to the individual stats right now. You mentioned he's averaging 13.5 points per game. That's 2 points behind their leading scorer, Deron Holmes. And when Malachi Smith went down, there was no question about it. There was even some question about this at the beginning of the season. Who was going to step up to be the leading scorer alongside Deron Holmes? I remember at the beginning of the season, you mentioned Kobe Elvis. I mentioned Kobe Brea. Obviously, it's been Nate Santos. Nate Santos, the junior who transferred from Pitt in the offseason, came into Dayton with some high expectations, but the University of Dayton and the fans, they did not necessarily know what to expect from Nate Santos. A transfer from Pitt, he's come over to the Atlantic 10 and Dayton, and he has been absolutely on a tear. You take a look at his full game stats. First game of the year, only 6 points against SIUE, 11 points against Northwestern. Matt, he's coming off a 26-point performance against Grambling. He had 19 against LSU, 18 against St. John's, 14 against Houston. This is a guy who has risen to be the number 2 scorer for the UD Flyers. And Matt, when it's all said and done, it would not surprise me if he keeps shooting like he is. Wouldn't surprise me to see Nate Santos being the leading scorer for the University of Dayton and the Flyers. And with Deron Holmes being your leading scorer, that's saying something.
And yeah, that's another stat that I'm taking a look at the averages on the season. Another stat that you've got to love for Nate Santos as well. He's the leading rebounder when it comes to average rebounds per game. He's got 7.5. Deron Holmes is at 5.6 rebounds per game. So it's safe to say Nate Santos has definitely stepped up in a big way for this UD Flyers team. I mean, like I said, you got 13.5 points per game so far this season. You're leading the team in rebounds per game when you have Deron Holmes on the roster of all people. That's saying something for what Nate Santos has been able to do for the Flyers so far this year. And it goes to show that you just needed to give, well, for Nate Santos, you just needed to give him some time, because obviously the first few games of the year, it didn't seem like Nate Santos was going to be that guy to step up and fill the shoes and be in the position he is right now. You just got to give him time. He's been dominant so far for a decent chunk of the season for the UD Flyers. Like I said, it just took a few games for him to get to this level.
And Matt, not to mention the fact that when you talk about Nate Santos, another thing that also he brings to the table that's going to go unnoticed, he also leads the team in average minutes per game. So this is a guy that he leads the team in rebounds. He's second on the team in total in average scoring, and he's been on a mission this season. And he's also putting in the most minutes out on the floor. When you have players such as Nate Santos and Deron Holmes leading the charge when it comes to points, rebounds, and minutes played, good things are going to happen for the UD Flyers. The UD Flyers, this is a team that if they can stay healthy and continue to stack these wins and develop, this is a team that I ultimately think could go far this season, not just in the A-10, but also in the NCAA.
And yeah, that's another thing with Nate Santos. You take a look as well with, obviously, he's the leading rebounder for the team. He's number 2 when it comes to average points per game. So far this year, amongst the starters, he has the best shooting percentage on the team. The only reason I say he doesn't have the overall best shooting percentage is because you have Isaac Jack, who's 15 of 16 from the field on the season. That's a pretty good shooting percentage on the year. Obviously, it's not to the numbers of Nate Santos, who's 37 for 59 on the season overall shooting from the field, which gives him a 62% completion percentage in shots from the floor so far this season. And then you've also got an 87.5%. You've got CJ Napier with 100%, but he's only took one shot. He's 1 for 1 on the season with his shots. So it's safe to say that Nate Santos has stepped up huge for this Flyers team because, like we said, we were questioning who was going to be number 2 to Deron Holmes on this team this season. There was a question of Kobe Brea not potentially not being a starter. Could he come up and from the bench and play well? Obviously, he's not been a starter so far this season. I was thinking Kobe Elvis could be good. He's only 9 for 31 from 3 so far this year, so under 30% from that area. Enoch Cheeks hasn't been terrible for the Flyers. He's averaging 6.4 points. Javon Bennett, he wasn't expecting to be a starter much this season. Maybe a few games here or there, but ever since Malachi Smith went down, he's been the next man up. He's been the next man to be and join that starting 5 for this Flyers team. He's averaging 6.8 points. But the Flyers, if you're a UD fan like myself, you've got to give Nate Santos a ton of credit and a ton of props. He's leading the team, like you mentioned, with average minutes per game. He's leading the team in field goal percentage on the season, at least of players that I would say he's leading the team in field goal percentage of players that have 40 or more shots on the year. He's leading the team in 3-point percentage, and that's not of people who have shot this amount of number. He leads the entire team in 3-point percentage on the season. He's number 2 in points scored on the year. The only area he's not really towards the top is free throw shooting, which he's 18 of 27 on for the year. He's at 66.7% of that, but you've got Deron Holmes above 70%. You've got a bunch of players. You have Kobe Brea. He's above 80%. You have Kobe Elvis above 90%. Javon Bennett's at 80%. Enoch Cheeks is at around 55%. Isaac Jack is at 75%. And then leading the team in rebounds, you just have to give props to Nate Santos for the year that he's put on. And you, as a UD fan, myself included, I would love to see him be able to keep this momentum up and keep this scoring up, because if he can, all the questions of who's going to step up and be the next man behind Deron Holmes, all those questions are going to be answered, and they're going to be answered twofold if Nate Santos can play at the level and continue to play at the level we've seen him play at.
Matt, the UD Flyers this season, they are legit. It is time for a break. When we return, we'll talk about the NBA, the standings, the in-season tournament that's still going on, and we will also close out this 2-hour show. That's coming up next here on Sports Now on the TKDS Sports Network.
At McAfee, we understand that life doesn't stop when something in your home breaks down. Our customers count on us to be there, ready when they need us.
Is there anything else you need from me?
No, sir, I have all the information I need.
Great, thanks. Just lock the door on the way out.
Thank you.
Let us get your home up and running again. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
We welcome you back to Sports Now on this Tuesday. Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington. Matt, let's get into some NBA basketball. The in-season tournament will continue tonight. Lakers versus Suns squaring off in the Western quarterfinals. Winner of that one will take on the Pelicans, the 3 seed in the semifinals. And then in the Eastern Conference tonight, the Bucks will square off against the New York Knicks. Winner of that game will go to the Eastern semifinal to take on the Indianapolis Pacers. The semifinal games will be played on Thursday, and the championship will be played on Saturday. So, Matt, we're within the final week of this in-season tournament. We've started to be able to see how it plays out, and obviously, still just the quarterfinals, still a couple more games to be played, 4 games to be exact, in the in-season tournament. But what are your thoughts on this? Is this something that the NBA should throw away in the future? Do you think this is something that they should continue? Do you think, or what adjustments do you think that the NBA should make with this in-season tournament from what you've seen so far?
The only thing I would say for this in-season tournament that, and it's not that I haven't liked it, but it's been somewhat confusing trying to follow everything around. If there was a set time during the year where they just decided to sanction off, say, 2 weeks total of pool play only, and then tournament play only, then I think it would be a little bit easier to keep track of and a little bit easier to see what all's going on, know exactly what's going on, and be able to completely track everything as easily as possible. But for me, I think it's something that, again, I say when it comes down to when you ask the question of keeping it around, when you ask that kind of question, it's something that it's brand new. Obviously, there's some people are having some confusion about it. Some people aren't having too much confusion about it. But I would say the best way to go about it would just be make it easier to follow. If you make it easier to follow, that makes it so much easier in general for, I would say, everybody. Because, I mean, you take a look back, Friday, November 24th, you had a bunch of in-season tournament games. 25th, you had just regular season games. 26th, you had regular season. 27, regular season. Then you went back to, on Tuesday the 28th, you had in-season tournament games. And then the 29th of November, you went back to regular play. The 30th of November, regular play. December 1st was regular play. December 2nd was regular play. And then yesterday, we saw in-season tournament play. Tonight, we're going to see some more in-season tournament play. I think to make it a little bit easier, it would be better to set it all up to where it's a 1.5 to 2 week event inside of the NBA season. Not stretch it out over a month and have it be this day of the week, we've got in-season tournament play. And for the next 3 days, there's no in-season tournament play. And then we're going to go back to in-season tournament play. And then we have another 2 to 3 days with no in-season tournament play. And then we got another day where we go back to in-season tournament play. If it was all bunched together in a smaller time frame, I think it would make it a lot easier for everybody to follow. Because if you're looking at it, say on the CBS Sports app, and you take a look at the games, it does not mention anywhere that it is an in-season tournament game or it is a regular season game. There is nothing saying it is an in-season tournament game. You go ahead and Google search NBA games, it shows in-season tournament above the games that are going on any given day. That's how I was even able to say and bring up that on the 28th there was in-season tournament games, because it has an in-season tournament game listing right next to the day of the game. And then that weren't in-season tournament games, like the 27th, you just Google it, look back at the schedule. It goes the game I see, Monday, November 27th, final, nothing to the right of it, Trailblazers 114, Pacers 110. You go down to the 28th, you see Tuesday, November 28th, final, and then to the right it says in-season tournament, Celtics 124, Bulls 97. That's the way you're able to determine, if you haven't been able to keep up with the schedule, when the in-season tournament games are. So, and like I said, on CBS Sports, you don't see any of that anywhere. So that's why it's been hard for me to keep up with it, because that's the app that I use to look at scores, look at news, look at pretty much everything. So I would say, obviously, you're going to see the types of success and the numbers that come from this once it's all wrapped up and once it's all done. But to make it easier on everybody, make it all within a smaller time window. Don't stretch it out over an entire month. Make it within a 2 or so week time frame so you can say, in-season tournament starts now. We're going to run it until there's a winner. I think that would make it easier.
And Matt, another thing that I want to talk about real quick, and I'm on board for the in-season tournament. I think that it's been good for the NBA. I think it brings something to the NBA that no other major sports and professional sports league in the United States has. I think it's unique. Do I think it's good? Yes. Do I think it's perfect? Absolutely not. I like your idea. Yes, it's been very confusing to follow. You and I have talked about that off air multiple times. And like you said, you go play an in-season tournament game, and then you go play a regular season game, then an in-season tournament game. And there's just so much back and forth with it. And to be quite honest with you, we're in sports. We talk sports. This is our job to talk sports. I thought the in-season tournament was done last weekend. It's just been very, very confusing and very tough to follow because you have to be paying attention 24/7 to the NBA to exactly know what's been going on in the in-season tournament and also with the regular season games that are being intertwined with this. Matt, we talked about this even beforehand, and I let the time pass to be able to talk this, to be able to sit on this and see how it goes. I'm still just at, my point stands from when I said this at the beginning of the tournament. So now with the in-season tournament, what does this do? Does this take away from winning an NBA Finals? Because now you have, or what are we doing? Are we crowning an in-season tournament and then a NBA Finals champion as well? To me, it's a little confusing that way. You bring that aspect into it. If you're professional sports, you should have one trophy that you are battling for it all. That being a national championship, or in this case, the NBA Finals. You're wanting to win that. So to me, intertwining it, I think it gets a little confusing. We talked about this a couple weeks on the show, and one thing I like about this, and I do stick with this idea, the NBA, what they need to do in the years to come, keep the in-season tournament. You need to make it shorter. Like I said, a week or a 2 weeks time span. You need to name it something different. Like in college basketball, you go play in the Maui Invitational. You go play in the Charleston Classic. You go play in a lot of these different tournaments that are in season, but they're not for a in-season championship trophy or anything like that. Play it for whatever city it's held in. If it's held in Las Vegas, play for the Vegas Cup. If it's held in, let's just say, Cincinnati, the Queen City Cup. Something along those lines where it travels around. I think that could be I think that could do really well for the NBA. I also like to see them shorten it, make it smaller team-wise as well. But that'll take us to the end of our 2-hour show. Make sure to join us tomorrow from 4 to 6 p.m. We'll continue our NBA talks. We'll also look at Week 14 in the NFL, and we'll make our hot takes for Hot Take Wednesday. Alongside Matthew Pennington, our producer Kevin Fowler, I'm Jackson Lightcap. Thanks for dealing with us. We'll talk to you tomorrow, 4 to 6.